Evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, December 19th. This is the final episode of VBC programming for 2024, and what a year it has been. We just want to thank you all for being here tonight and for being with us through this entire year. It's been a phenomenal year of veteran stories, of VBC programming. We've had new people join us throughout the year. It's really been quite wonderful, and something we would love to hear from each of you about. If you'd love to email us during this break and say something that you enjoyed this year, maybe something that we never got back to because we have so many stories, let us know. We'll put it into 2025. But it's so good to see you all tonight for Greatest Generation. We're going to be talking Battle of the Bulge tonight. And if you are interested, if you're new to the VBC, check out our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org, for more information about us, for our upcoming schedule into 2025 in the new year. With me are wingman Todd DiPastino, Executive Director of VBC. Todd, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. And as well, host Glenn Flickinger of our Greatest Generation Live program. Glenn, how are you this evening?
I'm excellent this evening. Thanks very much for introducing me. Great.
Absolutely.
I'm having a bit of a issue with my YouTube screen, but I'll figure it out.
Why are you on YouTube?
Not YouTube, Zoom screen.
Okay. I was going to say, hey, while you're messing with that, I'm looking around the room and I see quite a few VIPs. Quite a few. Barbara Smith, you're a VIP. Jerry Augustine, you're a VIP. Ron Stack, not Ron Stakovich. Batman, Russ Battiato. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us for this Battle of the Bulge episode. And I just want to point out, we're always excited when we have World War II veterans join us. Tonight, we have a Civil War veteran, as you can see, Marty Neiman. His camera isn't on, but there he is in uniform. You can see his portrait there, and we're very glad that he could join us. He was hard to get, I got to tell you, but we're happy that you're with us, Marty.
Good to see you, Marty. And yeah, so we have some great guests joining us tonight, including Greg Yost, Colin Heaton, Bob Brown. Bob, I know you have sort of an announcement to kick us off here. Would you like to give us the announcement at the top here? Let me ask you to unmute, Bob. Bob Brown. Can you see that on your screen? You should be able to see the unmute button. There you go.
I thought Glenn was going to do the announcement, and he was going to ask me questions.
I will introduce you, Bob. Bob is with the 87th Infantry Division Legacy Association. Bob, what is that? The 87th Infantry, and forgive my lack of knowledge here, 87th Infantry obviously must have fought in the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes, they did, and Todd's Todd has actually spoken on 3 different occasions, Todd, right, to our organization, and we did have annual reunions up until recently, and now we're still independent, but we've merged into the Battle of the Bulge Association. So I'm speaking more on behalf of the Battle of the Bulge Association tonight to share with, first off, we are looking for members. So if you want to check us out on, we have a very nice website. You know, you can just put in Battle of the Bulge Association into the search engine and it'll come up. But this is a time of year where we have our annual, the Battle of the Bulge Association has its annual commemoration of the Battle of the Bulge. Every year it occurs in Washington, D.C. This year it's, here, I have the dates.
January 21st to 24th.
Yes.
And I'll share that
information. You can say that. Go ahead.
I'll put that information in the chat along with.
Please do, Todd. Yeah. I just wanted to add that if you wanted to, which I'm doing, by the way, extending my stay So the hotel will be on there, Embassy Suites in Crystal City, Arlington, Virginia. But you can get our rate at $169 per night, which is, I guess, in this day and age, is a pretty good rate. If you want to
That's a
extend your
steal.
stay through, you want to extend your stay through the weekend. But I would focus in on the 23rd, because that is the day where we all get loaded on a bus from our hotel in Arlington, and we get a short bus ride out to Arlington Cemetery, and we have wreath laying out there, which is amazing, including the Tomb of the Unknowns. And we've been trying, I don't know about this year, but we've always tried to have a World War II veteran do it. And it's just an amazing, and I was, there for the changing of the guards, but this is like extra special, because we have a World War II veteran laying a wreath, on behalf of our association. So, and then all the dignitaries are out there, or some of the dignitaries from Belgium, Luxembourg, they're out there with us. And then we all gather together afterwards. Oh, then we make a short stop at the World War II memorial, where we also lay a wreath. And then we're hosted by for reception at the at the Luxembourg embassy. Sorry, and we all gather there, for and the veterans especially, are amazed by this. I mean, they're treated like royalty. Well, of course, when they go to Europe, they're treated like royalty too. But again, this is another opportunity. So anyway, I would encourage people. It's an amazing event.
Sounds like a
Once in a
fantastic
lifetime experience. Once in a lifetime.
Sounds like a very nice few days. We'll
Yeah.
put the information in the
Okay.
chat. Anybody that
Thank
would
you.
like to check it out can do so, Bob. Thank you so
And
much.
I encourage people to join the association too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I think we also wanted to recognize, before we introduce our guest, Barbara Smith. Is she in the room?
She is.
Okay.
Barbara, I asked you to unmute.
Todd, Barbara.
Yeah,
Hello, everyone.
hi, Barbara. Barbara, her problem is she doesn't have enough energy.
I just spoke with Ed Cottrell before we got onto Zoom. I'm so glad he's back in the States.
He is,
so
and he's
he
on
is back.
tonight.
Yes, he's on your screen already. I think on the second page.
He's waving.
Oh, there he
Ed,
is.
welcome back to the
He
States.
just got back from Bastogne. He was just there.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And I asked Ed to unmute, and I
I
guess,
think I'm unmuted.
yeah, Batman was there with you too.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Good.
How was it, Ed? How
It
was your
was a fabulous 9 days, I'll guarantee you. And we did everything. And on our book signing, I signed my name 1,242 times in 5 hours.
Oh my God.
The people were lined up wall to wall, stood in line for 3 hours to get in to shake hands with us.
Oh, wow.
I ran security for that
Can you
operation.
imagine that?
and I
Those,
was running security for that, and we actually had to turn people down. There were so many there.
I bet whoever's talking.
Oh, that's Russ Patiato. That is
Yeah.
amazing, Russ.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I wanted to point out that you just brought up the event about the Luxembourg and the Netherlands. Ed I have some great pictures to send him this evening, where he was standing with the King and Queen of the Netherlands, of Brussels, and then in addition, he was with the Grand Duchess and the Duke of Luxembourg.
and I also was with the King and Queen of Belgium.
Yes. Yep.
And
But most importantly, they were with Ed.
And I'll tell you what, they were very gracious about wanting to take pictures with each and every veteran, and they positioned them so that their escort, their family member, would be able to get a perfect shot, and then they had their press people take shots as well.
I was talking with the Queen of Belgium. She asked me my age, and I told her, and she said, "Can I give you a hug?" So I got the biggest hug from the Queen of Belgium, and the King was standing right beside me.
Hey Ed, how tall was she?
She's taller than I am.
She's Dutch.
She has to be a good 6'1", and he's probably 6'3".
She's pretty tall, but she's also pretty good looking, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I got some dirty looks from the King when I was getting my picture with her.
Did you like her?
Oh yeah, very beautiful people. I mean, very interested in speaking to you guys. They wanted to hear everyone's story. They really took their time with each individual. And then you had the dinner afterwards, after we did the whole nuts thing with this was at the end of the big parade where we wheeled the veterans up through downtown. What do you think, Ed? Were there about 40, 50,000 people out there?
I would say at least that. And they all gather around. And when you throw walnuts off the mayor's balcony, they scramble like heck to get those walnuts.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to ask about the walnuts.
So, at the end of the whole thing with General McCullough, nuts. So they have like a little mesh bag with about a half a dozen walnuts in it. And the tradition is at the end of this big parade, the parade starts in front of the city hall. We wheel the veterans up to the Patton Memorial, and Helen Patton was standing right next to me the whole time. And when we finish with the event up at the memorial, we go back to City Hall, and that's where we go up to the second floor where they arrange all the veterans in seats. And that's where the King and Queen and the Grand Duchess and Duke come and meet each and every one of them. And then everyone takes turns throwing nuts off the balcony to the thousands and thousands of people out there.
And this is in Bastogne or Luxembourg?
Yeah,
no, this is in Bastogne.
There are 40 or 50,000 people in Bastogne for this event.
Easily.
Oh, at least.
Because Bastogne is a very small town.
The roads were lined all the way from City Hall to Patton Memorial, 15 to 20 people deep.
Yep. And every time we went by them, they started clapping, and you could still hear them clapping as you got by them. Those people are so appreciative of what the American soldiers did to save that country. And even from kids, I had kids come up that are 6 years old and know about the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, that was my next point, was how many of the children were brought there by school groups. And these kids know the history better than most adults.
Yeah.
Especially in America.
Mm-hmm.
The respect that the World War II veterans get was just amazing. Hey, Ed, I want to tell them about Andy Bastino. This gentleman who was there with us, he is 100 years old, and he was Mr. World. He joined at 16. He was turned down, wrote to President Roosevelt, and got a direct placement into the military. He had trained Lou Ferrigno, Jack Dempsey, all these very famous, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and his wife is 67. And yeah, exactly. Right. And they have a video out that's just amazing that shows the two of them in the height of their, he had trained her to be a bodybuilder as well. And when I first met him the first day there, I shook his hand and I put my other hand on his bicep, and I was just amazed. I was like, well, you could knock me out. He goes, you want to arm wrestle? I was like, I'm not going to take that one. He took his shirt off and the guy still has a V back. at 100 years old.
Here we go. I think that's Ed, right? You guys can
Yes,
see
we
it?
are.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's in Bastogne.
Yes.
Nice.
Is that you in the back, Batman, or were you at that point?
That's bad.
No, I was just over to the side of him. I was pushing one of the chairs. I was in uniform.
This is me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was over on the other side.
Well, I wish we had been there with you. That would have been, I'm sure, a great time. Ed, you're still amazing to me. I'm still tired from the England trip 4 months ago. I don't know how you do this.
And it was cold. I mean, freezing cold. You could only imagine what it was like in 44. The wind was just blowing so hard. I don't care how much snivel gear you had on. You were looking for something to stand behind because it was just that bone chilling. And these veterans, Ed included, we put blankets on them when we put them in the chairs, and they withstood the cold for, I would say, a good hour and a half. The parade starts with the command staff of the 101st Airborne going by, then the 101st Airborne Band, then the Belgian band, and then they have us fall in behind them with the veterans. And there were at least 3 company strength of infantry behind us that would march up to this gathering point where the Patton Memorial is. And then it seemed like they would never run out of flowers. They were putting so many wreaths up there.
Well, thanks very much for sharing all that with us. But if we don't get started on our discussion of the Battle of the Bulge, we're going to end up going till the 81st anniversary. So if we could move, we'll ask you guys to come back later if we have the time. Thank you so very much. Todd, I think that was it in terms of any other people that were going to be on. Okay. So 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, plus a couple of days. We've done these other 80th anniversary programs this year. We did Market Garden. We did the Hurricane Forest just 3 or 4 weeks ago. And now, of course, the Battle of the Bulge. As I was complaining to Todd for more airtime, because doing the Battle of the Bulge in an hour and 15 minutes is not very easy. So I think we've got some unique twists on it. And we're not going to be able to cover every single aspect, obviously, of the battle. So if I missed your favorite aspect of the battle, speak up at the end. Okay, let me introduce. We have our 2 stalwart A-team players on tonight. Colin Heaton. Colin, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
Colin is going to be playing the German side of this tonight. And then we have our ace American general, Greg Yost. Greg, you still with us?
I hope I'm on. Can you hear me? I think I'm having some video issues.
No, we can hear you, Greg. You're good.
Great. Okay.
You're good.
Can't see you, but we can hear you.
That might be good.
And then we also have one Robert O'Connor. Robert, I don't see you on my screen right now, but I'm having all sorts of issues. There you are. Okay. So Robert O'Connor is the author. I mentioned this now a couple of times in other programs of a really interesting novel, The Jeep Show. And I don't read too many novels, but I read this one, and it's really historically accurate because it involves some very different entertainers that I was not aware of at all before I got into this book. And Bob is going to explain it to us tonight. Bob, give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. I practiced the marketing trade for most of my working life. About 10 years or so ago, I wrote a nonfiction book, and then I plan to write a book, also nonfiction, about a circus promoter by the name of Jim Hetzer. And when I located his daughter, she told me about his career in the circus, but she also told me that he was an MOS 442, an enlisted entertainer in World War II, and that he did Jeep shows, which I'll explain later. But and I said, oh, and she also said her aunt saved every letter that he wrote home from the war. And I said, golly, can I come down to Dallas and look at those letters? And she said, you don't need to worry. My sister published them in a book. So I had several hundred primary source letters from a man who enlisted and was put in what I call the Morale Corps. It was actually called Special Services after 1942. And I decided to write fiction because I felt that a historically accurate story that traced this soldier from Fort Thomas Reception Center to Camp Siebert to the Queen Mary troop ship to England to France and then up to the front lines of Luxembourg, where he gets caught up in the battle. I felt that a historically accurate story would reach a lot of people who are not aware of the sacrifices and what the soldiers went through.
Right, right. And in our little teaser announcement, we mentioned Mickey Rooney. And real quick, Mickey Rooney was also an MOS 442.
Mickey Rooney was an MOS 442. Mickey Rooney, most of the audience knows, and certainly Mr. Cottrell knows, he was the #1 box office star in the world in 1939. It wasn't just Andy Hardy movies, but there were a lot of Andy Hardy movies. He came under some pressure from the boss of MGM to enlist in the Army in 1944. And when he did, he went full bore with it. He could have stayed in Hollywood and worked at the Hal Roach Studios as an enlisted man, making movies for the Signal Corps. But he chose to be involved and to get shipped to the European theater, where he did many things because of his celebrity, but he did Jeep shows with this gentleman that I had learned of, Jim Hetzer. So Mickey Rooney was not afraid to put himself at risk to entertain frontline troops.
Yeah. Great, great. We're going to ask you to just keep this on hold for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we'll bring in the Jeep show discussion in more detail.
It'd be my pleasure. Thanks.
Great. So let me share my screen, see if I can do this without any hiccups.
We can see it.
Okay. So the cover of the book we just talked about. Highly recommend it. It's a very easy read. It's a novel, as I said before, even though at first you might think it's a work of nonfiction, but it is historically accurate relative to the morale troops and so forth. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. So let's talk about the Battle of the Bulge. Greg Yost, start with you. This is just a map of the advance of the Allies across Western Europe. What's going on here? What's the time frame?
Yes, if you remember from our previous classes, since they seem to have been discussed this before, there was the invasion of Normandy in June, but it took a long time to break out of that peninsula, longer than was expected. And when the breakout happened, it mostly happened in the south, and then the U.S. Army dashed across central France. The drive along the coast took a lot longer. That was the British and the Canadians under Field Marshal Montgomery. And to even out the lines, you know, we went over this in September, there was the Market Garden operation to try to take the bridges across the Rhine, wow, and also to maybe jump into Germany and maybe end the war. That didn't happen. And the lines in the south consolidated, and the problem was, of course, supplies. So the one other operation that the Allies tried to pull was just north of Luxembourg there, where you see that sort of 9th and 2nd there, which was the Hurtgen Forest that we just talked about last week, actually, a couple weeks ago. So the U.S. was consolidating, the Allies were consolidating the lines along this basically north-south line, getting their supplies, getting the troops ready. Winter is not a good time to attack. So they were trying to plan for a major thrust into Germany in the spring of 45. If you want to use this as a pun, there was the German phrase was "in Westen nichts Neues," which is the famous book "All Quiet on the Western Front." Well, things weren't all quiet but they were mostly quiet in December 44. So the Allies thought.
This area right in here is the famous Ardennes region. There's Bastogne that we were just talking about, which was one of the centers of the battle. Vith, which we're going to talk about at more length a little bit later. And the Germans start gathering these Panzer divisions, Panzer SS divisions, and so forth across from the Ardennes. But and this was their plan. But Greg, we don't pick this up. Why is it that our intelligence goes so soft, so quiet at this point in time from the Americans?
Well, that area there that you were just going up and down with the cursor was about an 80-mile front that was the U.S. only put 4 divisions there, 2 of which were weakened from coming out of the Hürtgen forest, 2 of which were basically brand new, had never seen combat, had just been formed. The U.S. did not think that anyone could come through there, especially in the winter, even though the Germans had done so in 1870, 1914, and most recently 1940, which some Americans, including the corps commander of that, what was called the 8th Corps, those 4 divisions were organized as the 8th Corps, thought, hey, the Germans have done this before. The first Army intelligence officer thought the Germans were up to something, and indeed predicted an attack through the Ardennes as late as December 10th and December 14th. And farther to the south, Patton's intelligence chief thought the Germans were up to something. Why didn't everyone know the Germans were up to something? And this, of course, is a major intelligence failure. Our discussion on Monday night, when we had the open discussion, some people compared it to as big as the Pearl Harbor disaster. And at this point in the war, it probably was. The U.S. should have known that something was up. They should have had people there or aircraft over there. The weather was bad, but not so bad. They should have seen this massive concentration of German troops. They should have also known that the German military doctrine, which some of them did know, calls for counteroffensives. They don't like to sit straight and just take things. They like to counterattack. So in the German military production in 1944, despite the strategic bombing, actually peaked. There was more German military production in 1944 than in any other year of the war. By October, they were making 900 tanks a month. So that's a pretty substantial amount. What are you going to do with tanks? Tanks are offensive weapons, right? A smart military person would have collected all these for defenses, both on the Western front here and over in the East where the Russians were advancing. But the Germans were planning a counterattack, which the U.S. didn't see. There was also the notion that the Germans were starting to get wise that the Enigma decrypt, which we know one of our regulars says they weren't using that as much. They thought that might be compromised, and had internal lines of communication where they could just communicate internally in Germany by couriers. U.S. didn't see this coming. Germans were getting smarter. U.S. should have seen it coming, but it didn't. So that's where we are on the 15th of December.
Colin, in our earlier discussion today among us, you had an interesting insight into the Germans' view of us breaking the Enigma and what they were thinking. Could you repeat that for us? Colin?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Well, what had happened was that during the campaign in North Africa, remember, Enigma was broken in 41. Totally decodable. Any transmission could be broken down within 10 to 15 minutes and translated. So what happened was that when Rommel was getting his supplies into Benghazi and then later Tobruk, when that fell in June of 42, they found it amazing that they could suddenly scramble ships from Italy or Sicily and get them into a certain location, only to be suddenly encountering British aircraft and ships to interdict the German supply lines. They couldn't figure it out. How the hell was that happening? And Wolfgang Martini, who was the communications chief of the Luftwaffe, firmly believed in 1941 that Enigma was compromised. And he told Admiral Dönitz that, who was losing U-boats left and right by 42. And Dönitz didn't believe it had been compromised. He says no one's going to beat the 4-rotor system because they increased it from a 3-rotor system. And Goering was under the same impression. And Martini said, all right, why don't you, he planned a supply drop
And sure enough, the British were waiting for them. And Goering was convinced. So he said, okay, we're going to stop using Enigma. And then Alfred Jodl decided that the Army would stop using Enigma. Only the German Navy kept using Enigma, which is why they were losing so many submarines. And then they strictly went into land communications, wire communications carriers. Hell, von Sangen was using carrier pigeons. So
hard to break them. Colin, how did this come about? This was Hitler's bright idea, was it not?
yeah, it sure was. Well, what happened was, remember, Market Garden launched in September. And right before Market Garden launched, Hitler had already wanted to do a massive counterattack to the west. So he had a meeting on September 16th of 44 with all the headshed types of the Third Reich. And he had this great idea that he would have Walter Model, Field Marshal Model, and Rundstedt plan this massive operation and with a timetable to take certain key areas. And as soon as Antwerp was taken, well, that kind of cemented the fact that he wanted that port. If he could cut the port off, it would really slow down the supply line to the Allies. But there were certain generals in the room, including Haushoff von Manteuffel and General von Sagan, Erich Brandenburger, and those guys who would be big in the Bulge battle, were looking around at each other going, well, that won't work, mein Führer, for a couple of reasons. And Hitler said, well, tell me why. Well, we don't have the fuel. We don't have the logistics. So we would have to move 3 or 4 divisions from the Eastern Front to supplement the force, so maybe even more. And Hitler made the comment that, don't give me problems, give me solutions. you know? And Sepp Dietrich walks in the room and goes, I overheard in the hallway, my Führer, I have a problem. Just let the SS handle it, we'll take care of it. So he said, okay, fine. You have the 6th SS Panzer Army. Okay, we'll plan it out. And that's how it happened.
Yeah. Very much against the wishes of the senior German Army command. Certainly von Rundstedt.
Well, don't forget, he fired von Rundstedt for disagreeing with him. Then he hired him back. So,
like 2 or 3 times, right?
Yeah,
so,
2 or 3 times.
Where did the Germans come up with all these extra divisions? There were 8 armored divisions and 13 infantry divisions, I believe.
Yeah, plus 3 support brigades.
Did they pull them from the Eastern Front?
They did. They pulled 3 divisions from Italy, from northern Italy. They pulled about 5 from the Eastern Front. Bear in mind, the Eastern Front at that time was in Hungary, and they were no longer in the Soviet Union. And one of the problems they had, which was panned out, was that Romania flipped sides. In August of 44, Romania joined the Allies. It changed sides in the war. So they lost the Ploesti oil fields. They didn't have access to high-grade petroleum. So that was 1/3 of the entire German military forces' petroleum supply. And Hungary had another, like 1/5 of it. So they were losing their oil supply, their gasoline supply. So they had to start trying to convert coal into synthetic fuel, which was really a problematic long-term process. So Rundstedt even told Hitler, he said, we don't have the fuel for this. He said, we can be defensive in nature and bring Gotthard Heinrici back on board, but we can't do this. And Hitler said, yeah, you can. Here's a timetable. Make it happen.
And was it true that they believed they could just overrun Allied fuel dumps and use the Allied fuel?
That was a plan. In fact, Otto Skorzen's commandos had 3 missions. One was to scout out and locate the fuel dumps and ammo dumps, capture prisoners, get information from them as to the location. The other situation was to do disruptions of changing road signs, destroying direction markers. And the other was to infiltrate fluent speaking English German soldiers who spoke English, many of them born and raised in the U.S., to infiltrate and try and disrupt communications and interdict and just do all kinds of creative mayhem. So,
right, Greg, this is a map that you dug up. It's pretty interesting. This is the actual situation map of the 12th Army Group in December of 1944. What does this tell us?
Yes, 1200 hours if you look in the upper left. So 12 noon, this map was printed. This is probably one of those 10-foot by 10-foot wall maps or table maps or something like that. And if we got closer, those units would probably be division sized. If you look in that major collection that you just had the arrow on, that's of course the Hirchen Forest, which was still going on. You know, much farther south is Patton's planned attack that's coming in. That central region right there, look at that. It's just practically empty. At least, at least the U.S. thought so. If you get really close up, I'm sure you would see that there are 4 divisions roughly there on the left side, the west side of the line. And it looks like there's maybe only 4 or 5 on the right side of the line, on the German side. Well, that wasn't the case.
Wrong, yeah. Big
This was
time.
literally an official map that this is what the U.S. actually thought the situation looked like at less than 24 hours before the battle actually began. Yeah.
The other element to remember in a very macro sort of way is that, the U.S. Army only produced 90 divisions during World War II, 89 of which actually were in service. One was still in the States training at the end of the war. Of those 89, I may get this number wrong, but on the order of 60 odd were in Western Europe. The others were in the Pacific, 20 some U.S. Army divisions. And it always was a close run thing. And Eisenhower and all the senior commanders knew this. Close run thing relative to personnel. And it's about this time, after Market Garden and Hurtgen, and then the beginning of the Bulge, that they began drafting, the cooks, the supply people. They began bringing in the African American companies, getting African American supply troops to volunteer for combat and form them into either companies or platoons. I can't remember which. But the rate of loss was much higher in the fall and winter of 1944 than had been anticipated. And we just didn't have enough troops. Just didn't have enough.
They also were holding some back because they thought that 45 was going to be the big year, the push into Germany. And I think most people did not think that the Japanese were going to be defeated in 45. I think that they thought, so they wanted to keep these people in the factories till they needed them. So yeah, US was not at full strength, so to speak.
Yeah, and that was the big compromise. How many men to hold back to build the weapons, versus how many to draft into the Army and put at the front. And there were limitations, definitely limitations. So this is the famous map of the Bulge. You see where the line was on December 16th. The attack starts by the German infantry trying to break through the crust. The famous areas are here, obviously, of Bastogne. The 28th Division is located sort of here near Clairvaux and in this area here. I think I have that right, Bob. And the 106th Division is more up in here. It's actually across in Germany. At least 2 of its regiments are. It's a green division. Had only been on the continent a few weeks, but it's put way out there at the front. So it's very, very lightly held. And I think it's at this point, because I can't, my system isn't quite. So we wanted to just show and talk a little bit about the commanders, okay, on both sides. Obviously, Eisenhower as the Supreme Allied Commander, but underneath him, you see Bradley. Bradley is in command of the 12th Army Group, which is comprised of, at that time, of Patton's 3rd Army, and there's Patton, and Hodges' 1st Army. And this is Hodges on the left. We've talked about him before. He's sort of the absolute counterpart to George Patton, who's the famous, talkative, somewhat boastful sort of man with the PR, the newspapermen love to follow. Hodges was just the opposite. Very quiet, very sort of withdrawn, but also a very good commander, both under Bradley at this point. Colin or Greg or even Bob, any comments on these men?
Well, from the enlisted men's standpoint, I have a quote in the book about Patton, old blood and guts, old guts and glory, our guts, his glory. So, I found in many letters that many of the enlisted men were quite skeptical of Patton, although they respected him.
Yeah. And this attack does come against Hodges' 1st Army. Patton's army, as we kind of indicated before, was just to the south. And of course, as you'll see, and as you know, Patton plays a very important role in the Battle of the Bulge. Again,
Let-
Bradley in the middle. I'm
Glenn,
sorry.
if we're into personalities, back up a couple. There's a picture. That's of course Bradley in the center, right? Is that okay? There's Bradley right there. Now back up to the previous one. Yeah, okay. There's Bradley again. Go one more back. That's the
No,
big
no,
three.
I didn't have one more back.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Oh, you want the map?
This map, of course, got generated very quickly in U.S. Army headquarters. They found out the divisions and the advances and everything. To show you something about Omar Bradley's personality, they people who were close to Bradley during the entire war said they could probably count on one hand the number of times he said something that was like FCC bleepable, which is very unusual in the military. They honestly thought he had a very clean mouth. He didn't say that very, very, very rarely. He walked into a room one time. He looked at this map a couple days into the battle, and he looked up at the wall and said, "Where did that son of a bitch get all this stuff?"
Yep.
Then he turned around and he realized there were other people in the room, and he said, "Sorry, pardon my French."
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was his personality.
Yes. Yeah. And then I want to begin to bring in Montgomery into this because he ends up playing a very interesting role and ends up being a very controversial role. Montgomery was obviously the commander of the British and Canadian forces. Forgot the Army group number, but just north of the Bulge.
The 21st.
21st Army Group, right? Okay. And then on the German side, who are we looking at here, Colin?
That is Generalfeldmarschall Walter Model. Model was a madman. So, and he's the one that Hitler put in direct command of this operation. Everybody answered to him, and he was called Hitler's fireman for a reason. And yeah, so Model definitely, when Model issued an order, some of his brigade commanders or even lower, and I interviewed two of them that were involved with him, said that you had two choices: follow Model's order and succeed, or die in battle. Because either way, if you didn't die in battle, he would shoot you when you got back.
Quite a leadership style.
Yeah, he was all or nothing. Now, this is Hasso von Manteuffel. Now, Manteuffel is a fascinating character study. Manteuffel was a devotee and studied religiously the American Civil War. He was fascinated by Jeb Stuart, Robert E. Lee, and those guys. He and Heinz Guderian planned the invasion of France, okay? And during the Battle of the Bulge, when he's sitting there meeting with his staff officers, the first thing he said was, "Okay, we're going to attack. Our objectives are St. Vith, and then we're going to push into Bastogne, and Dietrich's going to push up north of us and hook around, and we're going to surround these people." What would Jeb Stuart do? And that's what he said. What would Jeb Stuart do? He loved Jeb Stuart. You kidding me? And he was a very fascinating character. And Hitler personally appointed every commander for this operation for specific reasons. He chose Dietrich because of his loyalty, although he was intellectually pretty much burned out. But Manteuffel he chose because Manteuffel had never lost a battle like Rundstedt until this one. And the other commanders were chosen because of their combat prowess and the fact that they were unrelenting in battle. But Manteuffel had a slightly different approach to battle. When Manteuffel saw his men getting chewed up, he didn't just keep throwing men into the machine. He pulled them back, patched them up, gave them a rest and refit, and then he would personally go forward to see the carnage, and he would, like Rommel, he would go to the front, he would look at it, and Hitler sent a telegram to him saying, "Why are you at the front? You should be covering yourself and directing the battle." And he said, "Sir, I can't direct the battle if I can't see the battle." So, but he was a very unique character.
Yeah.
And he was commanding the 5th Panzer Army.
Right. Then you mentioned Dietrich. This is Sepp Dietrich here.
Yeah, Dietrich was pretty much expected to hang for war crimes for good reason, but he didn't. He just served his prison time and died later of a heart attack. But Dietrich was a old school Nazi. He was one of the first members of the party. When Hitler took over the party by 1923 of the Beer Hall Putsch, Dietrich was with him and Goering. And Dietrich was his most loyal senior commander. And he was the equivalent of a field marshal in the SS, an Oberstgruppenführer. And Dietrich was very considered very brave in battle, but that's because he was considered too stupid to understand the necessities of common sense. And many of his subordinate SS officers and generals who were professional soldiers complained about Dietrich not really caring about the value of caring for his men, and that Dietrich could not read a map. He would have to call in a lieutenant or a captain to say, "What does this mean?" Because he could not read a military map. But Hitler put him in charge of the 6th SS Panzer Army because of his loyalty.
And the key phrase there being the SS, which is separate from the German army itself. And by
Correct.
this,
Correct.
an army in and of itself.
Yeah, the SS units worked under overall army command, like under Model or Reichenau or people like that. But the SS units, they were totally autonomous. I mean, first of all, they had first dibs on the best tanks, the best weapons, the sharpest recruits. An SS general could send a letter to Hitler and say, "Hey, I need to have first picks on the recruits coming out of the training schools." They would get them. So they kind of bled off the best and the brightest to put them in the SS.
Yeah. The other part of this German force, though, there's several of these, what they call Volksgrenadier divisions.
Yeah, that's where the bulk of the manpower came from. The Volksgrenadier divisions were nothing more than civil servants thrown into uniform. These were poor guys in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm 60, I'm 62 right now, and I'm thinking that if I had to be thrown, and I served in uniform, but if I had to go back and do the work of a 21-year-old, I would be dead.
Yeah.
But they dragged. They hit nursing homes. They hit retirement homes. The Gestapo would go door to door, and if you could stand on 2 feet, they dragged you and put you in uniform. Children as young as 12 were forced into the Volksgrenadier units. In fact, the 12th SS Hitler Youth Unit was made up of kids of 16 to 18 years of age, commanded by seasoned SS officers.
So while these numbers are big, number of divisions, number of troops, the quality of the troops is not what it was in 1940 and 41.
No, in fact, Manteuffel ran afoul of Hitler because Hitler sent him 2 battalions worth of 16, 17-year-olds fresh out of school with 6 weeks of training. And Manteuffel put them in the rear, patching up wounded, working with people like that, working as whatever they could do, because he wasn't going to put them into combat. He said, "I'm not killing children."
Yeah. Okay, quite a guy. I forgot to take this one out, actually. That's Hitler and Sepp Dietrich, right?
Yeah, that's when he's being awarded the Oak Leaves and Swords back in 43.
Yeah. Okay. So the battle begins. As this is a little closer up view of what we had before. The 20, here you see right here, the 28th Infantry Division, just out, at the frontier. The 106th Infantry Division here really hung out way in the German territory. The 106th Division, brand new, really a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old privates without any combat experience themselves. Basically, the June graduation class from high school in 1944, drafted, trained for 10 or 12 weeks and sent overseas. Colin, you were going to say something?
No, I'm good.
I thought you had. So I want to get into the story of the Jeep story now. I think that's what I've got next on my slide. Yes, I do. And the reason I want to get into that is the story starts, well, at least the Battle of the Bulge story starts right here with the main character almost overrun by the Germans early in the morning of December 16th. Mickey Rooney was not there that morning. We want to make that clear. As Bob said earlier, I mean, here's a shot of Mickey Rooney. Makes me jealous as hell, surrounded by Judy Garland, and that's Lucille Ball, and I don't know the other names here, but wow, what a fun place to be. And he looks like about a 17-year-old kid right there. How famous is he at this point, Bob?
Mickey Rooney was the leading box office star in the world in 1939, so he was probably almost as well known as President Roosevelt.
Yeah. And he finally joins the army in 1944, as you said earlier. And he joins as what you called it, a MOS 442.
MOS 442 entertainment specialist, and is shipped off to Europe. They actually were part of a large army show called Hip Hooray that they were doing at Camp Shanks and some of the camps near the New York debarkation areas. And they thought they were going to continue doing that show in Europe, hopefully in Paris, they thought. But by the time they got to France, the American and Allied forces had advanced so far, so fast, that they were reorganized. And a famous Broadway director, Joshua Logan, who directed South Pacific and Mr. Rogers and just was an officer in the Morale Corps. And he came up with the idea of Jeep shows where 3 enlisted entertainers and a driver would drive up to just behind the front lines, and they would do shows for combat infantry that the USO or the Red Cross could not reach. And in the book traces important landmarks of the Battle of the Bulge. So in the book, the main character is doing a Jeep show with Mickey Rooney and another entertainer. And it's their 10th show of the day. They're doing it in a strong point called Hosingen for Company K, 3rd Battalion, 110th Regiment, 28th Division, as you showed on the map, right there in the middle of the line. The main character, Jim Hetzer, is left behind when these Jeep show buddies leave because a soldier has been injured and has to take his place in the Jeep. He thinks, of course, that he will just leave in the next morning with the regular supply truck, but the next morning is December 16th, and he is present at the very front of the very front lines during the German bombardment and the attack. He retreats with a captured German map to Clairvaux, which was an important town in that battle, the 110th Regiment headquarters, and it was overrun on about the 2nd day. He retreats from there to Antonioschaff. Antonioschaff is really just a crossroads, but Antonioschaff is where Task Force Rose, which was from the 9th Armored Combat Command Reserve, fought a delaying battle against one of the SS Panzer, part of one of the SS Panzer divisions. And crucial to the success or the resistance of the German attack was these early task forces that were thrown up on crossroads and were essentially destroyed by the advancing German forces, but they caused them to be delayed. And the Antonioschaff crossroads is where the road west meets the road to Bastogne. So the main character is there and then retreats to Longvilly, about halfway to Bastogne, heading south and west. Longvilly is overrun and he retreats to Bastogne, where he and other survivors and stragglers are organized into a unit that really existed, which was called Team Snafu. And we all know what Snafu means. Team Snafu was made up of some of the infantry soldiers that had escaped as their units were overrun. It was made up mostly of rear echelon soldiers, barbers, bakers, telephone operators, clerks, and then in the book, one entertainment soldier. And the Team Snafu played an important role. Obviously, the stars of the defense of Bastogne are the valiant 101st Airborne. The Team Snafu was used to fill the gaps between the regiments of the 101st and then do all sorts of other things like foraging for supplies during the period. So his fictional journey traces important factual places and events, and he ends up in Bastogne, and there's I take I think 5 or 6 chapters for 5 or 6 days in Bastogne. And one little, he is asked by General McAuliffe, not directly, of course, but one of General McAuliffe's officers asks Jim to organize a soldier show, an amateur show for the wounded in the cellars. And he does that and gets there's a soldier that is a terrible ventriloquist who performs in the show and does a imitation of General Patton that gets Jim, the protagonist, in a lot of trouble the next day. So that's the path he takes. He was with Mickey Rooney up until getting stranded in Hosingen.
And Mickey Rooney obviously was evacuated pretty quickly from.
They all the Jeep show units moved west as quick as they could, just like other units that weren't involved in the counterattack.
Yeah.
That is, by the way, that picture is during a Jeep show. I believe that's the 44th Division, and that is Mickey Rooney. And the real life inspiration for my protagonist would be standing behind him, and another performer would probably be standing behind him as well. But you can see that Mickey Rooney is just he's probably he did a lot of impressions of Hollywood stars like Edward G. Robinson and others, and he is probably doing his Edward G. Robinson impression right there, and he is absolutely cracking up the soldiers.
What a dynamo the man was, what a fascinating man.
Mickey Rooney was a genius. He was considered a genius by some of the directors he worked for. And as you know, he stayed involved with supporting our soldiers in the military throughout his life. His personal life was absolutely off the tracks at all times.
Total mess.
Could not control himself, just constant partying. But when it was time to work, he worked, both, making movies and then as an entertainment soldier. I'm full of admiration for him.
Yeah. Well, I highly recommend the book to our audience. It's an interesting way to see the Battle of the Bulge through the eyes of the protagonist that Bob was talking about. And it's historically accurate, other than the protagonist himself.
Right.
Lots of interesting real life characters, and you see the Battle of the Bulge from a different perspective. I'd like to ask the audience or anybody in general, did anybody ever hear of this Jeep show concept before this?
I thought so. I haven't met anybody that has.
Obviously, we all know about the USO and the
Right.
show, but those were civilians that put shows on in the further behind the line.
Yes. Correct.
Safety, right?
Correct.
Our Vietnam veterans, who I know I've heard many of you talk about seeing USO shows, Brad in Kuwait, USO shows and so forth. Was there anything like a Jeep show in Vietnam or in our other wars? Anything where someone came that far forward?
Nope. Not in Desert Storm.
Any of our non-veterans? Jerry Augenstein, I'm gonna unmute. Did you ever anything like that in Nam?
Yeah, we saw Nancy Sinatra and Jimmy Boyd the first month that we were there at the Tay Ninh Rice Bowl.
Yeah.
We had a stage, but that was only one show. That was it.
Yeah. And that was the typical Bob Hope kind of USO show.
Yeah, something like that. Yep.
Yeah. I remember as a kid growing up, I mean, my two older brothers were in Nam. I was, a bit younger, didn't go. And I just couldn't wait for the Bob Hope USO show every Christmas, I just thought it was fantastic. I'm sorry, Bob, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say the Army made significant efforts to address morale. In the training camp in America and in the rear echelon, the efforts related to keeping the soldiers from being bored and going to unsavory places in their time off. So they wanted to keep them in the camps doing things. And then in Europe and certainly in the Pacific, there were movies shown regularly, not at the front, but and then there was a fascinating program of book distribution. There were these books called Armed Services Editions, and I'm sure many of your listeners know about them, where the Army took popular books, printed them in an unusual style so that the book would fit in the pocket of a field jacket. And they distributed millions of these books, and literally these soldiers would be carrying them and in the trenches and reading them. The number one favorite was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, a novel written in the early 20th century. And the author of that, a woman whose name escapes me at the moment, Glenn, got thousands of letters from soldiers overseas, thanking her and asking questions, and answered every one of them.
It's an interesting aspect of World War II, the Battle of the Bulge, something none of us had ever heard of. So thank you, Bob, for bringing it to our attention in such a unique way, too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and your guests.
Sean, let's pause for a minute. We haven't asked for any questions, or if there's anything in the chat that we should address.
Of course. I know there was one back here. Dick Snyder, which German general decided to execute soldiers in Malmedy?
Malmedy.
Malmedy.
Yeah. Colin and I were talking about that before the show. Colin, you want to tackle that one?
Say that again. What subject?
Who was responsible for the Malmedy massacre?
That was Gustav Knittel. And actually, he was in command of the 1st Leibstandarte Reconnaissance Company under Kampfgruppe Piper. And Piper got a lot of heat for it, but he wasn't even there. In fact, the guy who actually committed the crime, we believe, even though Knittel was in command, was Puchke. He was a captain who was in command of a reconnaissance company who also committed the Wereth massacre. But Knittel was the one who handled the Malmedy massacre personally, and he did it. And he escaped justice, by the way.
Yeah, as did Piper, right?
Well, Piper found out about it the next day. He wasn't even there. He was pushing so far west. In fact, Kampfgruppe Piper, his platoon command element pushed further west than west rather than anybody else on the German side. And he found out about it. And although he wasn't too remorseful, because he had given direct orders that not slowed down, take no prisoners. So he was therefore given command responsibility for what happened. And he was put on trial at Nuremberg for it.
Colin, could I add one thing that I came across and see what you think about it? Many of these soldiers in the SS units had been fighting on the Eastern Front against the Russians.
Yep.
And take no prisoners on the Russian side and on the German side was sort of almost standard operating procedure, I read. And thus, that may have influenced their behavior during the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, absolutely. I interviewed 12 SS generals who survived the war. And 3 of my SS generals, of the 12, 3 were opposed to killing prisoners because they saw them as interrogation value. Wilhelm Dietrich from Market Garden fame was one of, actually, we were pen pals. And when he opposed the execution of Soviet prisoners, Heinrich Himmler asked him, in front of Sepp Dietrich, actually, of all people, asked him, he says, "Are you opposed to eliminating these subhumans that, are going to contaminate Germany?" And he said, Dietrich wrote to me and said that, in his opinion, my Reichsfuhrer, to me, a subhuman is someone who doesn't understand the value of a true intelligence asset. And so Dietrich was never... Himmler never liked Dietrich, but Hitler did, because Dietrich was very effective. And Model liked Dietrich because Dietrich was very effective. That's why 2nd SS Panzer Corps at Market Garden was assigned under Model's 9th Army. But yeah, some of these guys were really brutal bastards. And I interviewed I interviewed several. Max Wunsch, who executed prisoners on the Eastern and Western fronts. He served time for it, got out, and I knew Wunsch quite well. I didn't like the guy, but at least he was honest. And I asked him, I said, well, why did you guys kill people rather than just, adhere to the Geneva Convention? He said, because I wasn't fighting in Geneva.
That's the definition of a nasty bastard.
Well, let me
Yeah.
chime in here on the Normandy massacre, since there are some experts on it here. That happened the day after the Bulge started, right? It happened on the 17th. And there's a general belief that somehow the word got around, and this really tightened American resolve.
Yes.
That the word spread like wildfire, and this just got, I mean, whatever hesitation U.S. troops had, when the word got around about Normandy, they just did everything they could to stop this advance. Is that a fair assessment, or is that sort of hype after the war?
No, that's very true. There were two massacres, by the way. There was Malmedy and there was Vith. And on my YouTube channel, I have a video on the Vith massacre, which is overlooked by history because the dead soldiers were black soldiers and they weren't considered as valuable. But because of what happened at Malmedy, and when the word got out about the Vith massacre, the rumor about it wasn't proven until a month later in January when they found the bodies. But at Shenonia, on New Year's Day, American soldiers actually captured a bunch of captured 94, I think, SS prisoners, and they killed 60 of them.
Hey, Colin, wasn't there also a massacre at St. Lo?
St. Lo had a massacre as well, yes, and that was conducted by the 2nd SS Das Reich. That was a company under the command of, trying to remember the guy's name. And by the way, interestingly enough, the commander who did the St. Lo massacre was the same commander in 1940 who murdered the Canadian soldiers and locked them in a barn and set it on fire. And he was later hanged. He was hanged after the war.
Well, the Das Reich division, they were the guys who, I can't remember the name of the French town as they were coming up to Normandy. Huge massacre there. So
yeah, they locked all the civilians in the church and lit it on fire.
That's the
because the resistance shot a German soldier, and so they decided to they killed all of the soldiers that they had captured, and then locked all the civilians in the church and lit it on fire.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Well, we've evolved into massacre land. Sean, other questions, or is there just a question from the audience before we take our break?
This might be for Bob. Where was the quote unquote, this is the army by the time Rooney shows up in the Jeep shows?
This is the Army was a big, almost Broadway level musical written by Irving Berlin. And I'm going to say that show, I don't even think that show was ever done overseas. It toured the country. And it was, and there were, the cast was soldiers, and it was a general kind of rah-rah, get ready for the war kind of experiment. But so that Rooney was not in that. Rooney was not in the Army at that point, and I think by 44, that show had run its course.
Thank you.
Barbara,
George
we see
has his hand up. Sean.
Yes, George, let me ask you to unmute.
Find it. Yeah, Sean, how's everybody? I hope they're doing fine. The town you mentioned was Ordor de Seglain.
Ordor Seglain.
Das Reich was on its way north, of course, being strafed all the time by American planes, and then the guerrilla action, and they just did what SS troops did. I think they locked a lot of people in barns and burned them. And I can't remember the name of this fellow. I had read a book that I bought at the Holocaust Center, but this one French Jewish person had already escaped 3 times from boxcars headed to camp. And he was on a train with another person, because he writes a book later about this. And this German tank, regiment is moving up, and they looked at each other and said, no, I don't want to be wherever they're going. And they jumped off the train. Well, train was going to Orador de Seglain, and they took everybody off the train. I know they said a streetcar full of people that knew nothing about it were taken off, and they were all murdered.
Yeah. There's a great book, Max Hastings, one of Max Hastings' earliest book, the famous British journalist on World War II, is called Das Reich, and it's about that division during World War II. And
yeah, I know, Sir Max. We spoke about that. Oh, the name of the officer who did Orador Siglain and also did the deaths in 1940 was Fritz Snuckline.
Okay. Okay, unless there's anything else, Sean, you want to do the station break?
Sure, we'll get that done real quick. Just like to thank our sponsors here, first being tobacco-free Adagio Health, who have been with us all year. We just want to thank them here at the end of the year for supporting us and continuing to support us. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. Find out more by visiting tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And we'd like to thank UPMC for Life for also supporting us throughout this year. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. They have plans designed for veterans by veterans that can save you money and get you more benefits. You can view all of your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. This is our magazine. We published 4 of these this year. They are 100% free. If you would like to get one, just let us know your address. We will make sure that you can we'll get them in the future, and we can even send you hopefully one of these, though I believe that we've sold out of them, though we order probably about 12,000 of these. They get sent out everywhere. It's one of the best ways we have to get the word out about the Veterans Breakfast Club, filled with wonderful and fantastic veteran stories. And we will put a survey into the chat. We've been putting these in the chat all year, and for anyone who's filled one out, thank you so much. It takes 2 to 3 minutes. Just lets us know how we're doing, how you enjoyed this particular program, what we can do better, maybe some ideas about future programs if you have any. We'd love to hear from you. I'll put that link into the chat. And we have our final in-person breakfast of 2024 coming up this Saturday at Bethel Park. Christ United Methodist Church is always an amazing turnout. We have probably almost 200 people join us at this particular in-person breakfast. It's always a great time. If you haven't had a chance to see us in person, please do come and join us. It's free. If you just want to sit and listen and maybe have a cup of coffee. If you want to have breakfast, it's $15. Not that much to sit down and listen to some incredible veteran stories. So please do join us there. Other than that, it's a Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah. And we're going to be back on, I think, January 3rd, I believe, with our next Scuttlebutt, which will be a Monday open conversation. So look for more information about that.
I think it's January 5th, if I'm not mistaken.
5th, you're right. Thank you.
Yeah. Something like anyway. Okay.
Well, listen, Don Patton here. Hey, Don, how cold is it in Minnesota?
Well, we got 7 inches of snow today. First snow ever. Say, listen, just a clarification. Earlier, I think it was said that Piper was tried at Nuremberg. I think that is incorrect. I think he was actually tried at Dachau.
You're right. I was incorrect. It is Dachau.
Yeah. I think as I recall the story, I'm actually working on a program on Nuremberg, but I think the political prisoners were tried at Nuremberg, and the military were tried at other locations. There were so many trials of different kinds, but most of the military were at Dachau.
Yeah, most of the big concentration camps had their own war crimes trials as well. Yeah,
right. Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah,
thank you, Don.
This is the smartest audience in the world, I tell you.
Can't make up anything. I know that.
No.
Okay. We don't have too much time left. Let's try to get to at least 2 or 3 more points about the Battle of the Bulge. Okay. And again, it's just impossible to cover it all in the time frame that we have. So we're not going to talk a lot about Bastogne tonight and Patton's relief of Bastogne. That's my call. Why? Because everybody knows about that. That's the story that is well told over and over and over again. And if someone wants to ask some questions about it, we will. I wanted to talk about the action around Vith, if I have that pronunciation anywhere near correct, that occurred also right at the beginning of the battle, but just to the north. If I could flip back to the map here, okay, you've got Bastogne here, and you got Vith here, right? And we all know the 28th Division in front of Bastogne. They hold up the Germans long enough that the 101st Division and actually parts of the 10th Armored Division get into Bastogne, and the famous siege of Bastogne, relieved eventually by Patton. Vith is very lesser known. It's the 106th Division, which was overrun. At least two of the regiments that were the furthest out front were overrun. One of the famous men that was in one of those regiments was somebody that Colin interviewed. Who was that, Colin?
Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut. I knew him. He was a good guy.
Wow. Knew how to write a novel.
Well, Slaughterhouse 5 is his personal experience. He just changed the names.
Yeah. But anyway, the 106 is headquartered actually in Vith, and there was another regiment of it near Vith. It's the 7th Armored Division that comes to the relief, not to the relief, but comes to defend Vith. And that's part of the story I want to tell. And I think it's important to tell because of the men that were there that fought just as bravely, just as hard as the men at Bastogne, died just as in greater numbers. This is Vith from the air. You can see it's not much at that time in 1944, small village. It's actually a village that had been part of Germany at times. And there were many, German citizens, German sympathizers still living in this area. This is the general I want to talk about, who's a fascinating man. It's the only picture I could find of him in World War II. He was a one-star general at that time, General Bruce C. Clark, Clark with an E. And he's in command of something called the Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division. And I just thought it'd be interesting to take a little dip into the weeds as to how an American armored division was formed, was organized, was structured at that time in 1944, right? 3 tank battalions, that's where all the tanks were. Really, these were called armored infantry battalions. They didn't march, they had vehicles. And then there was the artillery battalions that were, for the most part, all self-propelled artillery battalions, right? So you could put these into regiments in the traditional way, but as they did with Mark Clark, and as they did more and more as the war wore on, they would form these combat commands where they would combine 1 or 2 tank battalions, 1 or 2 infantry battalions, They would put together different parts of the division in order for it to fulfill a specific mission. Is that the way you understand it, Colin and Greg?
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. And also because of logistics.
Yes. I mean, you get this combat command going forward with, 150 tanks in the 2 tank battalions, 75 self-propelled artillery, and then a bunch of half tracks and so forth with the infantry battalions in it. If it was on one road, it would string out for 8-9 miles, right? And actually be very vulnerable. So you never wanted to try to do that. But it became a very effective way of using these armored battalions as the war wore on, right?
Well, the Germans bitched about it because they said the only reason the Americans can move that much men and machinery is because they control the skies above it.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, in my reading of this, and Mark Clark used these terms, the idea was to create a combined arms unit, tanks, artillery, infantry with the air above it. And it became it was sort of the American version of the Blitzkrieg. Right. So Mark Clark is ordered into Vith, I think the day after the beginning of the Bulge, the 17th or so. He arrives in Vith on the 17th. General Jones, I believe it was, who was the head of the 106th Division, is there. He's in not very good condition because he knows his two regiments out front are in danger of being surrounded. But Mark Clark shows up that day basically with himself and half a dozen command officers. And slowly but surely, the rest of the combat command shows up, and he positions them in a semicircle around Saint Vith. Very, very much like the situation in Bastogne at the beginning. We're back to this map. Okay, so the German orders were to take Saint Vith on the second day, to take it on December 17th. Bruce Clark and other elements of I think it's the 9th Armored Division, some other ragtag units, parts of the 106th that had not been captured, hold Saint Vith for 10 days. And they are almost surrounded a couple of times. And just at the very last moment, Clark is able to pull his men out to the northern shoulder that had been formed here by the other elements of the First Army, the 8th Corps, the 7th Corps, Ridgway's paratrooper divisions, to form this northern shoulder and block the Germans from going any further.
Well, he did a magnificent defense, because the 26th Pfalz Grenadier Division, the first 8 hours of battle, lost 226 men to no American losses.
Right, and Mark Clark, or Bruce Clark, I'm sorry, could not understand why the Germans did not attack him in greater force in those first couple of days when he didn't have all that much in the way of forces.
Mm-hmm. That's because they ran out of fuel.
Yeah, out of fuel, and some of the German forces attacking were, those Volksgrenadier divisions that weren't all that aggressive to begin with. There's some of these great pictures of the 9th Armored and the 7th Armored Division show up here. The battle here was ferocious, and at the end of the day, I guess the question is, Colin and Greg, what importance did the ability to hold Saint Vith out from the Germans for 10 days make in the Battle of the Bulge?
Well, easy. If Saint Vith had not held out as long as they did, Bastogne would have fallen, because Manteuffel's 2nd Panzer Division had enough fuel to continue, but they couldn't get through what the engineers had done. And when finally Montgomery gave the order to abandon Saint Vith, right, so they fell back and they consolidated the defensive line, the Germans couldn't push through it.
Yeah. So it's an interesting intertwining of results with Bastogne and Saint Vith. Bastogne may not have held, as Colin said. Greg, you have a thought on that?
No, very much. And if we remember, go way back to the original plan, the Germans were going to cut through the line and then head north. They were going to make this left turn, right, or the left hook, the right turn. And by pushing them farther south, Saint Vith, that just that delayed them all the more. And literally hours counted, not days so much. I mean, 5 days was spectacular, but if they had held out for 5 hours, that could have made all the difference. I don't know as much about the Bastogne side, but I do know that they were hoping to head north towards Antwerp, and I don't think most people don't think they would have gotten there, but who knows how far they would have gotten and how much confusion they would have caused. So yeah, important, huge battle during the campaign.
This is actually a pretty neat picture, an article I found. That's Clark on the left and Manteufel. Did I get that right finally, on the right?
Yeah.
In the 1960s, outside of Saint Vith, reliving the battle. Clark stayed in the army. I think he rose to 3-star, perhaps, as I recall. Manteufel, what happened to him after the war?
He got into various businesses after the war.
Right, man.
He actually he lectured. I think Colin, you probably knows, but he lectured at West Point in the 60s.
Yeah, he did. He
was an advisor of the somewhat mediocre movie called The Battle of the Bulge, which was a spectacular from Colin, 65 or something like that.
Something like that.
He came to America. He was highly respected, as you could tell already from the conversation. And lectured at West Point about, of course, mobile warfare and tank mobile armor warfare.
Well, Manteuffel was highly revered because he was totally anti-Hitler, and Hitler liked him. Hitler respected his battlefield capabilities, but Manteuffel was an anti-Nazi from Jump Street. He was never on board with it, and it was known by Allied intelligence that if Manteuffel was a professional soldier, but they weren't worried about him doing silly,
Right.
So we just touch on Bastogne again. It's such a well-known battle, the siege of Bastogne. If you want to watch, I think the best movie, the best production about the Battle of Bastogne, it's the 3 or 4 episodes that are in Band of Brothers.
I agree.
Colin, you were involved with in some way.
Oh no, I did Masters of the Air. I had nothing to do with Band of Brothers.
Oh, I'm mistaken.
Glenn, I wanted to tell you something that I'm sure Colin knows this, but it was very fortunate that McAuliffe was an artillery officer. And basically, my understanding is he gathered the artillery units that he had, and basically he could fire around Bastogne as though it was the face of a clock. So it was very difficult for the Germans to gather enough force in one place to really punch through. And obviously the resistance, incredible bravery and combat experience of the 101st was a huge factor. But McAuliffe's experience as an artillery officer really paid big dividends.
I know, no, you're absolutely right, because once Manteufel's armor ran out of fuel, all he had was infantry, and the infantry were kind of nervous about going into the wood line because McAuliffe was giving them the same treatment that the 88 millimeters gave the 101st earlier. They were shattering trees and causing casualties, so they weren't really all that positive about going forward very, very fast.
No, just like in the Hurtgen, shoot the trees.
Yeah, and by that time it was extremely cold.
There's an element of the relief of the Battle of Bastogne by Patton, the relief by Patton's forces, that I always found fascinating. Now, I'm not 100% sure about this picture, but the man who led the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division into Bastogne, the first tanks through, was a Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who had already gained a huge reputation. The Germans knew of him all the time, right?
Yeah, Reinhard Gehlen had a file on him.
Yeah. So I just found
in fact, it was in February or March of 45 when Hitler said, "Someone get me that Jew Abrams," but Abrams actually was, I believe, a Methodist.
Of course.
And of course, for you Vietnam veterans, that's a very familiar name. He goes on to be the commanding general in Vietnam after Westmoreland leaves. And from my limited reading of Vietnam War history, maybe a better commanding general than Westmoreland had been. But both of them were World War II veterans. And Creighton Abrams, of course, has the tank named after him. So quite an interesting man. Now, we can't get into this in any detail. We talk about the Battle of Bulge, mostly about Bastogne and Patton's relief of Bastogne and so forth. The Battle of the Bulge lasts until mid-January, late January. It goes on for 6 weeks or so. And most of it is the counteroffensive by the U.S. forces. Now, what I want to get into here, because I also think it's an interesting part of this, is that when the Germans attacked through here, they basically split the First Army into two. I'm sorry, the 12th Army Group into two. The First Army here in the north and Patton's Third Army here in the south. It had been more oriented this way, but a large part of it, turned around and went this way, right? So let me ask it as a question. Greg, are you still with us?
Yes.
What did General Eisenhower do that ended up being so controversial?
Well, the First Army and Ninth Army, which are sort of up north there, are actually closer to the British and Canadians, who were under the command of Field Marshal Montgomery. They had originally been, the First Army and Ninth Army had originally been under the U.S. 12th Army Group, General Omar Bradley. But for purposes of coordinating activities and communications and supplies, Bradley, well, actually Eisenhower said, let's put them under the command of the British. So this, of course, is very interesting. You have U.S. soldiers under the command of a foreign leader, as close as the U.S. and the British were. That was somewhat controversial, probably the more so because Montgomery was an egotist of the highest order and took credit for everyone else's hard work, including the U.S. units who basically won that northern part of the Battle of the Bulge. Montgomery said, "Oh, they should be so glad I came in and saved them and everything." So this was very controversial, and it almost led to, quite frankly, almost led to Eisenhower's resignation. He said, "I can't deal with this Montgomery guy anymore." And so finally they put a little leash on Montgomery, but he had done a lot of damage to sort of U.S. British cooperation at this stage of the war, which is maybe about the only thing the Germans could have accomplished during this offensive, is that they had split the U.S. and the British politically, maybe even more than militarily. And Montgomery almost took the bait. So yeah.
Bradley never did like Montgomery, but after this, they were basically not on speaking terms. And the way I have read the story is that, I think we're done with this, is that somewhat towards the end of the battle, Montgomery holds a press conference, which he'd love to do. And at that press conference, he makes it seem like he was the hero of the battle. And he also kind of pulls in British troops into the picture. And British troops had absolutely zero participation in the Battle of the Bulge. And this gets back to the U.S. press, which makes a huge, brouhaha about it, if you will. And of course, it gets back to Eisenhower. And it's at that point which Eisenhower basically says, look, it's either me or him. You choose. And they were ready to let Montgomery go. And it was only Montgomery's chief of staff who went to Eisenhower in February of 45 and basically got on his knees and begged Eisenhower to give Montgomery another chance. Bob, do you understand the story similarly?
Absolutely. And Montgomery was very chastened and flew to see Eisenhower in person and apologized. He was very much in fear of losing his job and getting sent back to England. There's a joke that is told in my book where Bradley and Montgomery are in the Eiffel Tower, and Montgomery said, looking down over Paris, and Montgomery says to Bradley, "Is there anything I can do to make you happy?" And Bradley says, "Yeah, you could jump." And that definitely sums up how Bradley was down in Luxembourg City, as I understand, and he was out of contact with those units up in the northern shoulder. So Eisenhower's decision was not, I can't analyze it at a level that Colin, you could, but Eisenhower's decision was commonsensical. But Bradley was absolutely infuriated.
Well, I'll tell you who told me about that. Do you know the name Pamela Churchill Harriman?
Yes, I know. I've heard that name.
I knew Pamela very, very well.
Wow.
And Pamela told me that Winston, her father-in-law at the time, that Winston was so aggrieved at Montgomery's perception of American combat prowess that he considered recalling him himself.
Wow. Yeah.
Montgomery is not a guy you want to go out and have a beer with.
No, von Rundstedt called him der Jester in Kampf and Feind der Luft. He's basically a clown in battle and basically an idiot at large. And,
Colin, you probably know that Patton got very aggravated with Montgomery because Patton felt he could trap many of the German forces before the Bulge closed and bag, tens of thousands of German forces. And Montgomery, as I understand it, in typical Montgomery fashion, was very cautious about moving. And so as after St. Lo, many German troops escaped back to the fatherland who might have been captured by more aggressive tactics.
Absolutely, with the Falaise Gap. Think about that for a second. Montgomery managed to connive all of the available gasoline on the Red Ball Express, saying he could push into the Germany, reach the Rhine. And Patton's like, he's not going to push into Germany. He couldn't push a picnic table, And so Montgomery got the gas, and Patton's sitting there with no gasoline for his damn tanks, and he's pissed off about it. And the whole damn thing just. And Gavin told me, he said, "Look, you wouldn't believe this. I was in a meeting with some of the generals, and they were so pissed off at Montgomery getting the fuel because they knew he could do nothing with it."
Right. Well, look, we've gone well over our normal time limit. Let's see. Are there any questions we can answer from the audience? Anything we should address before we try to wrap this up?
Well, I think we have so many questions, and I think that that Colin and Bob managed to address a lot of them.
Okay.
So thank you all for joining us tonight. Glenn, you're a man I want to have a beer with, unlike Monty.
One other person I want to recognize before we sign off, though, is Bob. Bob von Degen, you there? I think I see you. Bart, okay. Bob, tell us, you sent me an email earlier today about the Battle of the Bulge programs on what network is it that you recommended?
C-SPAN 2 from 2 o'clock till 8 o'clock. Every hour they have a different topic, and it's pretty much mirrors what you've just done in an hour and a half.
Yeah. C-SPAN 2 for the people who are too nerdy for C-SPAN 1.
Hey, that includes myself.
Oh, me too. Me too. I love it. Absolutely love it. I even like C-SPAN 3. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you to both Bobs. Thank you to Glenn. I wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a Happy New Year. Some of you I will see on Saturday morning at our breakfast in Bethel Park. Others, I won't see you until the new year. So all the best for the next couple weeks. I look forward to having a robust, open conversation on Monday, January 6th. Until then, take care, everybody. Good night.
Happy holidays.
Thank you all.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you.